Hey everybody, this is John from Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another deck guide. This time, another variant of creativity that's been popping up since Phyrexia All Will Be One. That is Atraxa Creativity. Now, Atraxa Creativity, not very different from the creativity decks we all know and love. The only real difference is what it's trying to do. Now, the two variants we've covered before are the combo variant with Xenagod and Worldspine Worm. Also in the Explorer format, it happens to be the Lotus God and Sage of the Falls, simply because the other two creatures aren't available in Explorer. Also, we've covered the Torrential Grearhulk Magnum Opus, kind of mid-range variant of the deck. And this variant, I think, is kind of in between those two. On one hand, you have a one-shot creature that can basically take over the game and win if it's not dealt with. That being Atraxa Grand Unifier, which is a 7/7 with Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink. Can erase a lot of board states itself. In some ways, it's kind of become the new Gristle brand in a lot of ways, with the exception of you don't have to pay life to draw cards. Instead, when an ETBs look at the top 10 cards, you can choose one of each card type to put it in your hand. Oftentimes, the way this deck is built, that's a 3 or 4 of, but we'll talk about the surrounding caster in a second. Basically, Atraxa is kind of the midpoint between Torrential Grearhulk stuff and the actual infinite combo. That said, it is vulnerable to removal, etc., so it's not a guaranteed win, but you do have other ways to win the game. Rest of the deck, you are an Is-It interaction deck. You have Fiery Impulse as a way to deal with early things, Fiery Prophecy, obviously being one of the main ways to shuffle a creature back into your deck. Simply because, there's no brainstorms in this format to do that kind of thing. Beyond that, you get to play things like Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Shark Typhoon to make copies of tokens to be able to target with creativity, as, unlike Modern, you don't have something like Dwarven Mind to make tokens for you. Alternatively, you also have Prismari Command to make treasure tokens to be able to target, and it's a nice modal card as you're trying to dig through your deck. It can also blow up artifacts, though there aren't a ton in the format unless you're playing against a Karn deck. The rest of the deck, just dig and interaction. You have Spikefield Hazard as additional land drops, can also deal with 1-drop creatures. Secrets of the Keys seems to be a 1-of that pops up in a lot of these lists. I'm not sure why as a 1-of this pops up, but, makes clue tokens, and then you can target those clue tokens, obviously. Impulse is a way to dig for whatever piece you're missing, whether you need interaction or the combo itself. Make Disappear as a little bit of a counterspell thing, along with Negate, just to be able to deal with annoying things out of your opponent's decks, potentially stop a combo from killing you, etc. And then, rest of the deck, pretty self-explanatory. 4 copies of Creativity. Some of these variants run other things. You can run things like Luca. Sometimes you'll see a 1-of copy of Transmogrify. So used any way you can find to target a creature, Creativity being the one you see the most. Land-based, you see a couple copies of Mutavault as things you can target. Sekenzan as a way to put tokens into play. Ottawaru is a little bit of interaction, and then a bunch of red Blaze duels. Play a couple mountains, that way if your opponent's playing Field of Ruins and stuff, you can fetch up a land. Obviously you need triple red, so your land-based tends to slant a little bit red. Sideboard stuff, obviously Disdainful Strokes for big mana decks and control mirrors. Hits a lot of things out of those, like the various big cantrips like Memory Deluge and Planeswalkers, such as the Wandering Emperor. Also very good against mono green, hits a lot of the key payoffs in that deck. Whether it be Cavalier, Karn, Storm the Festival, etc. More copies of Negate when you're fighting counter wars and against control decks. Mystical Dispute when you're playing against blue decks, period, mainly Spirits and the Mirror. Hullbreaker Horror when you need an alternative threat. Obviously, Atraxa can be countered, dealt with rather easily. Hullbreaker Horror a little bit easier, a little bit harder to deal with, especially if you can hold up instant speed or interaction. Obviously, getting a discount on it with a creativity is quite nice, but still something you can cast on 7 mana and can take it over the game. Rending Volley and Fry. Let's be honest, red and blue creatures are a staple of the format, whether it's humans, spirits, angels, Greasefang. All of those are relevant targets. And then Brother's End is kind of a nice modal sweeper card to have access to. Sometimes just 1-for-1 removal isn't quite good enough when you're dealing with a lot of decks, whether it be humans, spirits. Not as good versus angels as they have a lot of X4s, but nice to have a sweeper that can deal with that, while also clean up random artifact decks that you might run into along the way. Another variant that's popped up is a Jeskai variant of the deck. Doesn't really add a whole lot to the deck. I mean, it adds some removal spells, it adds some sideboard options. You get to play Nahiri as an alternative way to get your Atraxa, and obviously this is a one-shot versus, it permanently staying in play, but still very powerful. The rest of the deck, Volcanic Spite is kind of the upgraded version of Fire Prophecy. It came out with the March of the Machines with the battles and stuff, so you can target battles. Spikefield Hazard, still obviously a nice addition to the land base. Chain to the Rocks, if you're already running a mountain-based land base, makes sense to have this as a decent removal spell. Just remember, a lot of times to try to target basic mountains if you can, especially if you're playing against a Field of Ruin deck. Make the Spear, we've seen this pop up again and again as kind of the cheap early interaction counterspell, even over something like Censor or Jawari Disruption. Holds its value a little bit later in the game. Fable, if you're playing a red mid-range deck or a red deck of any kind that isn't just straight aggro, generally you're slamming Fable in it. It's kind of almost become the smuggler's copter of red mid-range decks, whether it be Rakdos, whether it be Mardu Greasefang, whether it be other creativity variants, etc. Just solves the wrong half problem, etc. Behold the Multiverse goes along with Dig Through Times. This is one of the few control decks I've seen actually run Dig, as opposed to some of the other variants. Though that said, still doesn't put a ton of cards in the graveyard, compared to the old Dimir Inverter decks. So, Shark Typhoon is a way to create tokens, and then rest of the deck pretty self-explanatory with the creativities. One thing I did want to point out in the land base, this version, instead of playing Mutavault, this one's choosing to play Mirex, which is an interesting one. Whenever it comes into play, that turn you can tap it for 1 mana of any color. Otherwise, it's a colorless land that's mainly here to make tokens. It creates 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Mites with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Obviously not the best not being able to block, as opposed to something like Castle Ardenvale's 1/1s. But, it is ways to close out the game in a longer game. Force your opponent to respect that. And, it's a way, obviously, to make tokens for creativity itself. Sideboard, obviously you have access to white cards, doesn't really change a whole lot. You have access to Dovin's Veto as opposed to Negate. Obviously nice to answer. Your opponents must answer your threats, whether it be, Immersion Ultimatum out of Lotus Field combo, whether it's dealing with Teferi or Storm the Festival, etc. Just nice to have an uncounterable counterspell for those situations. Rest in Peace. Greasefang primarily can bring it in against the other Izzet decks that are not creativity, mainly Phoenix. Starnheim Unleashed is an interesting threat. It's a foretell, make a bunch of angels. So kind of a pseudo entreat the angels if you really want to set it up that way. The rest of the deck, Hullbreaker Horrors, we've already kind of covered what those come in the more interactive matchups, or at least the more counterspell based ones, I should say. Narset, very good against the control mirrors, very good against decks trying to cantrip like Lotus Field combo. And then the rest of the sideboard options we've already kind of talked about. Now, the advantages of this version over the instant win combo, this one's a little bit better at grinding. Obviously, Atraxa kind of refills your hand. The downside is when you're in situations where you have to win the game, for instance, against mono green, probably performs a little bit worse overall, but still very similar to what we've already seen in the format. We'll certainly be doing some gameplay with the various different types of the deck to see what's the best version of these. I still don't think Creativity is a top tier deck in the format, but it is certainly a deck that has made waves, obviously by winning the Pro Tour. And obviously this version's popped up since the printing of Phyrexia LOB1. So, remains to be seen what's the best variant, but, if you like these creativity decks, they certainly aren't going anywhere, and they certainly have staying power in a format that's even more powerful than this in Modern, so something you should be aware of. And if you like to play pattern of that kind of creativity deck, you're probably going to like this kind of creativity deck as well. But, unfortunately we don't have Arcana Cruelty, but Atraxa or an instant win combo, both of which are quite nice as well. So, whatever flavor you prefer, there are different variants. And if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for the next video.